Tim Castano, you are a New York Giants season ticket holder.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about what is going on with the New York Giants as a tangential shareholder in a way?
Yeah, I guess the way it works out, I own one ticket because we have 4 seats and they're split among my brothers and me. But yeah, to quote Ron Burgundy, that escalated quickly. That jumped up a notch. I don't think there are many of us who at the beginning of the season would have thought that this early in December we would be looking at a new coach.
We thought 10-2 maybe.
Possibly, yes. That shows you how wrong we were across the league, but most intensely with the Giants. And I think we're going to look back, hopefully, on this season as an aberration in the history of the Giants. And I think that's what a lot of the commentary points to, which is this is not Giant-like. This is sort of the dysfunction that occurred prior to the Tisch family becoming involved, some of the dysfunction that led to George Young becoming the leading voice in the front office years ago. So hopefully this is just a blip and it can resume operating as the franchise has for a while and what we've come to expect from them.
Do we blame their decision-making prowess for McAdoo? Because a year ago it looked okay. I mean, we still never felt quite confident with him, but he won, and that's...
he won. It wasn't... Look, he was never my choice. No one asked me, though. Nor should they have. And that's not really a criticism of him per se, but let's go back to the history of Ben McAdoo, which is... he was sort of forced upon Tom Coughlin as offensive coordinator. He had to oust Kevin Gilbride and bring in Ben McAdoo.
Why though? I'm thinking back to then. How did he come into their vision?
Well, I think he came into the vision. One, they were looking at the quarterback's performance, which the touchdown to turnover ratio was out of whack that last season. And the style that Gilbride plays is very different from the style McAdoo plays. And then they were also looking at, who is the highest performing quarterback in the league? Aaron Rodgers. Therefore, can we bring in the person who is guiding Aaron Rodgers' offense? And that's what they did. So it seems like a logical progression. Like what we have is not necessarily working. What is working? Why don't we import that model? But then, and to Tom Coughlin's credit, he tried to make it work with Ben McAdoo, and it did. I mean, the offense did improve. Manning's numbers improved, although you've pointed this out too, which is it just doesn't seem like his offense. And it always was a bit of an uncomfortable fit between the two of them.
Now, the thing I was thinking about, we've sort of somewhat made fun of the whole Ernie Accorsi management consultancy, helping teams get GMs and coaches. I'm almost wondering, was Ben McAdoo out of that grouping? Because it seems like one of those too clever moves, right? Where it's like, here's the new young guy, let's get him in place. I don't remember now if that was the case, because Ernie Accorsi is back involved now as sort of the consigliere of the Giants. And I wonder if he was involved then.
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know.
Because that would make me wonder some things. Because not that it's the wrong way to do things, but I always have like a weird feeling when someone says, we figured it out.
Let's, though, look at an example where that same approach did work for the Giants, which was Steve Spagnuolo was an assistant to Jim Johnson in Philadelphia. Jim Johnson, of course, was a tremendous defensive coordinator. Giants defense, they believe, needed an upgrade in 2007. They bring in Steve Spagnuolo, who implements his system. The first 2 games, they really struggle with it. They get it midway through the 3rd game, and then Steve Spagnuolo coordinates probably the best game plan in Super Bowl history later that year to defeat the Patriots. So it can work, too.
That's true. Yeah, I guess you need shots as well from that point of view. But you wonder with their decision-making process. They had McAdoo for those years. They saw what he did. But like they always say in the NBA, the difference in moving one chair is the largest chasm you could ever imagine, from that assistant coach to the head coach chair. And so I keep struggling with, did they see this? Did pressure and stress and the job of being out front of this media, this tough media in New York. Not tough, but there's so many entities vying for the competitive angle and the sources and all that. Did the moment just get him, and you never really could have stress test what this job really is?
I think so. I think you don't know until you put someone in that position. So this probably happens in almost every industry where you have a younger talent in whom you place a lot of faith, and you don't want to miss the opportunity. And that was the case with McAdoo. They didn't want to lose McAdoo. They saw something in Ben McAdoo that they really valued. They did not want to lose him to another team, whether that be Philadelphia 2 years ago or somewhere else. So they believe that rather than bring in someone else who is also has a lot of variables, why not go with a guy who's been in the building for 2 years? And, you know, in some ways it was almost a mitigating the risk, because you're going with a known factor, maybe fewer variables, and seeing how he performs. Now, they might have seen Ben McAdoo as someone who is not in any way really influenced by external factors, so he does have sort of a folksy, down-to-earth demeanor, which he certainly delivered on his first press conference and sort of maintained, and maybe that's what they were looking for, is someone who is not flashy, who won't be ruffled by the attention, and maybe the public and the press will appreciate that and will find it endearing. Maybe the first season it did because they won, but then when you don't win, what was once endearing becomes irritating. And I think that's maybe what happened here.
And isn't it funny when you think about Philadelphia and looking like they really wanted to get him potentially, or maybe they were just getting the Giants a little riled up to sign him. But you look at the first year there, didn't look so great, even though they had the up-and-coming rookie quarterback. But they brought in the guy who was always the assistant in Doug Peterson as well. And then you look in his year two, and all of a sudden it's a charmed life.
It is. Yeah, that's a great example. You could actually look at the Jets, too, to look at the counterfactual for Ben McAdoo. And this is something I know Mike Francesa pointed out, which a month ago, really, not recently, which is for all the Giants fans who are calling for Ben McAdoo's ouster. Let's remember, Todd Bowles nearly brought the Jets to the playoffs in year one. Year two, things went poorly.
Only had one less loss.
Yeah,
than Ben McAdoo in his year one.
Yes, brought Todd Bowles back. Jets fans complained, but now Todd Bowles has exceeded expectations with his team. So I think the message to Giants fans a month ago was exercise some caution, because there are enough examples around of coaches whom we gave up a little too early, or had the ownership given up on a coach, they would have missed out on a performance. Bill Belichick, his first season back in New England went poorly. I remember a few games into his first season, there were erroneous reports circulating that he lost the locker room and was about to be fired, and then 5 Super Bowls later, you see what happened. So, yeah, I think the Giants wanted Ben McAdoo to work for a lot of reasons, but then the situation just became untenable.
And I've been talking to you about this, it almost reminds me of how we go back to Philadelphia, the guy who they got rid of, Chip Kelly, who had all that success early, then really had a bad season, and things went really south because he was sort of a know-it-all. And you can be a know-it-all, and you can tell people, you're not going to be involved in my thing, you go and sit in the office in the back. You can do that when you're winning. And same thing with Rex Ryan. When you're winning, any method you use is okay until you lose. And you start losing, and people are looking out for you to get you out of town real quick. They're just waiting for that one opening. And I think with Chip Kelly, he left, he went to San Francisco, and he sort of said, I'm happy of the air here, everything's great, this is it. And he had one win all season. He's gone, 1 year. I think sometimes in football, because there's so few games in a season compared to other sports, and you don't have the ability to really make up wins at the pace you could in baseball or basketball or hockey, I guess. Although hockey, they seem to have really quick triggers, getting rid of coaches all the time. But I think when you lose embarrassingly and you go below expectations to such a degree that it almost makes the decision for you. Ben McAdoo, if they get a couple of those wins early on, it might sort of change the narrative here. What they did was just get embarrassed, and they got embarrassed when they were already at an embarrassing level. You look at Kyle Shanahan this year. People were like, he could get 1-2 wins. It's okay. Chip Kelly couldn't get 1-2 wins. That was so below expectations, and Kyle Shanahan can show you a little bit of grit, a little bit of win here. They beat Chicago by 1, and all of a sudden people are like, well, no, he's building. But Chip Kelly wasn't building. It's funny how expectations work.
It does, yeah. And no one knows what goes on inside goes on inside the headquarters of a team, how a coach goes over with the staff, how he interacts with everybody in the building. That may buy a certain person more goodwill and more equity as decisions are being made. That certainly happens in the public. You see with the press that a coach who definitely cultivates a relationship with the press gets more leeway than a coach who does not. And I think in Ben McAdoo's case, especially over the last, say, 10 days, 2 weeks, his style in dealing with the press, which early on may have been folksy, and some people likened it to Bill Belichick, but then they pointed out, well, Bill Belichick can do that because he's won, whereas Ben McAdoo...
Same thing with Coughlin.
Yeah.
He was always on, close to being out.
And the thing with Coughlin, everyone pointed this out from the very beginning, which is he was beloved within the Giants organization. So that from the support staff to the security guards to every single person in that building, he treated them with respect and was a gracious person, and that earned him so much, I think, respect throughout the organization.
Currency.
Yeah, it did. And I'm not saying that didn't happen with Ben McAdoo.
Well, reports were that Coughlin was not necessarily like that. Maybe he was gracious with staff, but with players, he could be a little bit of a taskmaster.
Well, yeah, I mean, his Jacksonville tenure and his that's really
very
why
military
he was and that's why he was brought into the Giants, which is toward the end of the Fossil era. They believed that they had grown a little too undisciplined, so why not bring in the person whose reputation was built on discipline?
And he still even had to change a bit.
He did,
in order to get the room of the modern day player at that time.
He did, yeah. And if you remember the season before they won the Super Bowl in 2007, so the 2006 season, toward the end, they were still in the playoff hunt. They had to win a couple of games or a game to get in the playoffs. And during that last month, everyone was talking about how Tom Coughlin needed to go. And Mike Francesa, to his credit, I remember him saying this, and I guess Chris Russo was on the radio as well at that time with him, saying if Wellington Mara were here right now, or George Young were here right now, and you have your coach who is playing to get his team into the playoffs, and like in the final weeks that's on the line, and he's put them in a position to be in the playoffs, we wouldn't be talking about getting rid of him. Like, that's not the way the Giants do it. And we saw what happened. He got to playoffs. They didn't succeed that year, but then the following year they came in. He did adjust. I think the reports were that some players went to him, discussed with him maybe perhaps how he could modify his approach, which he did, and
the Players' Councils thing he did.
And they won. So I don't know what happened in terms of how Ben McAdoo managed the situation, but it just, the word I think they used yesterday, John Mara, was spiraling. Was that the word, spiraling out of control? Or
yeah, I think that was the case. Well, it's interesting because he said, what would Wellington Mara do? And now it's like, what would John Mara do? And it's funny because maybe he was 1 or 2 games from saving his job, and maybe that was the springboard to a run, but we never felt that way. That's why we won't get the counterfactual here, right? I mean, that's the difficulty. And I had myself going through this week saying, boy, this can't last. And usually in sports, it doesn't when it gets too untenable, and this really got ugly. But you're like, the Giants don't really fire people in season. And then the weird thing of getting the report from Ian Rappaport, who always is inside the Giants, and then sometimes doesn't even have the right information. Remember when we were at the game against the Lions and it was like Odell Beckham punched somebody in the face or something? You're like, is this a spoof? And who knows if it happened, maybe it did. But the whole idea he's going to be fired after this game, that just felt very un-Giants-like. And I keep wondering, I mean, you had brought up maybe Spags leaked it, but I keep wondering, why did that happen? What was What was the need for that to happen? Is it so that the fans can feel good, they have a full day to know this is coming, or that the Giants let you know that if this is going to be a bad game, it buys them some
To be clear,
benefit?
I said someone close to Spagnuolo maybe believed it, yeah. I don't know. You're right. It is very un-Giants-like. And comments from, say, Cowboys fans or Redskins fans is like, this feels like Dan Snyder and Jerry Jones, not like the Maras. And maybe that is just emblematic of why they needed to move on, which is this, even how it was concluded in a very un-Giants way, so they needed to turn the page. I don't know why that information got out, how it got out. Who knows who leaks or how? I mean, leaks are usually controlled by the organization, and they're purposeful, but then things can also get out.
Because how many people had this information, too? It's a small coterie of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially 2 to 3 weeks after they'd come out and made the declaration that no decisions would be made until after the season, but then that shifted a little bit following the Eli Manning decision and some of the messaging that went out around that. So
I think they were shocked by that too.
I think they were too, and I think probably Coach McAdoo didn't do himself any favors by countering what John Mara said in terms of how it was executed. So just don't know. I
was talking to a buddy of mine who does a podcast out of South Florida named Ernest Christian. I was on his podcast right after because he's a Giants fan. And we were both kind of remarking jokingly that it got to a point McAdoo running the Giants felt like Trump running America for people who were sort of against Trump, where even with Tom Coughlin, he was the older guy. So like if there were memes about him, it was like the red cheeks, it was the intensity. There was something embarrassing about the memes with Ben McAdoo. It's kind of similar with Trump, and then the decision to do what he did to Eli almost for his own kind of personal gain to try to get himself out of it, and like kind of throwing Eli to the side felt like a very Trump thing. But I almost wonder if the Giants were like, all right, we installed this young guy, we'll grow with him. Oh wait, this guy's not even that cool. I mean, you look at the difference between him and McVay or him and some of the other. He is just, and then he got worse over the year. He went from having like the ridiculous looking poofy hair kind of thing to like the slick back look and the glasses. And I saw someone like their coach was being made fun of on Twitter, and it was laughing at him, not with him. Well,
it goes back, if you win, it works. So Belichick on the sidelines, certainly there are a lot of memes about him.
The hoodie. But people were making fun of McAdoo even last year when they were winning, like the Cheesecake Factory menu.
Oh, that's right.
And they're getting like 19 points a game, and he's got this menu that goes on forever.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately for Ben McAdoo, the comparison's always going to be Ray Handley now with the Giants, comparing Handley's tenure to his and how things went down, and even a little bit like what he did with Eli Manning is kind of similar to what happened with Phil Simms and Ray Handley, and how he managed the Jeff Hostetler Phil Simms relationship and what went on there. And people forget with Ray Handley, like, oh, he was an unmitigated disaster. He was, but his first season they almost made the playoffs. They were in contention right up until the end, like the last couple of weeks. And then the second season was just awful. But how would Ray Handley have survived in today's day and age? I don't know. Probably similar fate to Ben McAdoo.
No, it's very tough. But Peter King, well, actually, before I hit that, it is amazing because I was reading an article before, I think in the New York Post, that Ben McAdoo had told a confidant, apparently he has those, that for the Giants to be successful, 80% of the offense has to revolve around Odell Beckham Jr. We saw early on when he wasn't involved how bad things looked. The Giants were not a great prolific offense as it is, but he was almost like their playoff hitter who would just hit the 3-run homer when you needed to hit it. And you wonder if him not being there at the beginning and then ultimately going out with the injury literally covered all the ills that could have kept a Ben McAdoo in place for longer.
Well, some suggest that Odell Beckham Jr. kept Tom Coughlin in place longer for a season or two beyond that. His development and his maturation allowed Coughlin to hang on. So,
and is that the changing personality of the team, in that it was the defense, yes, but it was Eli Manning's heroics that kind of kept Coughlin in place. The heroics in these magical Super Bowl runs. And they didn't score big numbers in those Super Bowls either. Like the first one was 17-14, and then I can't remember.
It was 22.
Something like that, yeah. But like that's sort of the way they play. But when you get to the playoffs, you don't think of, ooh, this offense is struggling. You're expecting the struggle. And so they kind of carry that over into their regular seasons, and all of a sudden it's like, we got problems here.
They did put up a lot of points against the Packers in that divisional game in the NFC.
That's true. Yeah. And they looked really good. One other thing I was saying with the guy on the podcast, the playoff game last year was sort of, when we look back, was sort of the move from the one season to the other, where the first half of the playoff game, they played a competitive, they were right there, they looked good, they're hitting the tight ends over the middle, and then the second half looked like the second half of this run, which was this season.
Mm-hmm.
But Eli was the one who carried Tom through a lot of those years by getting those Super Bowls. And it kind of moved from a reliance on Eli to a reliance on Beckham. And when your reliance is on the periphery, it's a little dangerous because you can live or die with that. You really want to have that weapon, but you're wondering now, gosh, do they go to the point of view of saying, we really need to lock this guy up? Or do they go, we need to rebuild from the inside out again and build a team that wins at the tight ends and then has timely play on the outs?
Good question. Some would say you don't make a move on Odell Beckham Jr. coming off an injury, that you'd be selling low and you need to get more out of that asset. And then some would say you're also crazy for giving up on a player like that.
And do you want a new quarterback potentially coming in who has that weapon?
The Giants, I think, even, let's not look at Beckham, but they did have some issues, obviously, in the secondary this year in terms of insurgents within the locker room. How they handle that will be interesting, too, because...
That could have been the coach, too.
Mm-hmm.
That could have been a disrespect for the coach, whereas that's nipped in the bud more.
Yeah. But are they sending a message that if you disrupt the locker room to a certain degree, we will listen and we will get rid of the coach? Or do they have to send a message to the players as well? So I'm interested to see how they construct the roster based on some of what occurred this season. Not even so much from a performance standpoint, but from a personality standpoint.
See, it's funny, too, because you look at skill players as something that can make the quarterback better, but you almost want to have a team, which is how the Giants were when they won, where the quarterback makes the skill players better. And I don't know where Eli is. Has he been masked? Has some decline been masked by Beckham? Because, for instance, you look at a team like the Broncos. It was only like 4 years ago, that Peyton Manning was running almost the same offense with the same skill players to numbers that you couldn't even imagine, 40, 50 points a game. And then you put a substandard quarterback in place or even a replacement level, they can't do a thing. And they have a lot of those skill players. I often wonder what goes through their heads. But Eli was making the skill players play above themselves. And now the skill players are trying to make Eli play above himself. And I don't know where the line is. Is it that he has declined where he needs them to raise him up? Or does he still have it in him and the Giants just didn't trust to do that?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously the offense has not played well as of late, post Odell Beckham Jr. being out, post some of the other injuries. But I do, in isolated instances, I see what he can do with that receiving core, which some would say is not at the level it was with the other players in there. And I still see him performing fairly well with that receiving core. And there are definitely examples of sharpness and him getting the ball where it needs to be. Now, there are also other examples of some
Eli being Eli
botches here or there. And you don't know, to your point, you don't know if that's Eli, you don't know if that's the receivers. But I don't know, I've seen some encouraging things of with his work with the receiving core as it is, which is depleted.
So interestingly enough, Peter King had an article today where he says they should not go back to Eli this year because what's the point at 2-10? Sure, it's a salve to the fans, and you want to start to build the goodwill up again. And boy, it has the fans giving Eli standing ovations when the team is 2-10, no matter what he does. So that was kind of a Machiavellian, ingenious move if you could have made that happen. But should they just let Davis Webb play? I mean, I think that's the key. If it's Davis Webb, it's different, and you got to sit down, you got to talk to Eli and say, this is what our thought is. We need to know what we have, and maybe he will play. But I hadn't thought of that angle of just like Eli should be okay with. Look, they are 2-10. He should be okay with just letting other people play.
You can take, you can adopt different perspectives on the entire Eli Manning situation, because even amidst the outcry last week, there were some people taking a more sober, position and saying, well, okay, let's remove Ben McAdoo. Let's remove how the information was relayed. Let's just look at the decision in isolation. And you could make a strong argument for the Giants looking at what they have on their roster. So to Peter King's point, yes, I could see what he's saying. Was this sort of a knee-jerk move to put him back in there? I don't know what their plan is. I think their plan has to be to get Davis Webb some reps over the last several games of the season. Maybe he even does start a game or two, but he does have to get some reps. So I'm interested to see when they do get him in there and how they get him in there. I hear what Peter King is saying. And I was a little surprised, too, that they reinstalled Eli Manning, because the damage had been done.
It was so quick, too.
Yeah, the damage was done. And you might as well just sort of go with the plan that you had in place. But this also may be a signal that, well, that was the McAdoo regime, that was the McAdoo plan. We now have, even on an interim basis, a new leader, and he is going to have the opportunity to put in place his plan. So I don't know. I'm interested to see. But Davis Webb does, I think, need to get some reps.
And it's amazing how long we're going to have to wait for a GM and a coach at this point, because we're still 4 games from the season being over, and you really can't even start talking to people until that they're out or that middle of the Super Bowl week.
Well, you can talk to college coaches.
That's true.
Yeah.
But David Shaw's not coming, I don't think.
Damn. He's my choice.
Yeah, he would be. He would feel right, but so it's not even. We're just talking. There's not really anybody you go, man, we need that guy.
No, and this is
or gal.
in with the Giants, I'm thinking about the last several coaching decisions that they made. Bill Parcells kind of surprised them with his May exit, so they kind of had to scramble with Ray Handley. Although apparently George Young was very fond of Ray Handley. Dan Reeves was probably their third choice, because Coughlin didn't want to come back at that point, and Dave Wannstedt went to Chicago. I think that's the way it worked. It was Wannstedt going to Chicago. Definitely it was Wannstedt. It may have been Coughlin. I'm not sure. So Dan Reeves was the third choice, and he even joked about that in his press conference. But when the Reeves era was winding down, they had already had their eye on Jim Fassel, and he had been in the building as previously, and they'd watched his career, so he was identified as the next in line. When Fassel was winding down, you already knew they had their eyes on Coughlin.
When Fassel was the one, I believe, from the Nuno DiMaggio book, where he was the one, but then was it Bill Parcells was going to come back? And
yes.
It happened to be a time where cell phones weren't around yet, so they made the decision. Was it George Young who maybe left the Giants headquarters to go to the hotel where Jim Fassel was staying to go tell him he was going to be the coach? And then I forget whether it was Mara, I forget who it was, but they made the decision at that point, nope, we're going to Parcells. And they called over to the hotel, and once they talked to the front desk and they said, I think George Young had already passed them, they called up to the room, and then they said, Jim Fassel picked up, I believe, and they said, oh, is George Young there? And he goes, yes. And they're like, okay, can I just talk to him? And they're like, did you tell him? And I think George Young was like, I did. I'm like, okay, he's our coach. Amazing how that stuff works. And he had a good run.
He did have a good run. And then they had their eyes on Coughlin, and then obviously because they brought in McAdoo, it had been rumored that he was the replacement. So I don't know. This, I think, surprised the Giants, so they did not start, I think, eyeing potential candidates until maybe recently. So this is interesting. This is an unusual coaching search for them, because in the other past few times, I think we've had an idea of who it's going to be, even though they've considered other people.
And I believe, last point on the Giants, where they stand now at 2-10, you almost want them to just lose out to get that highest of pick as possible. Let the Browns even maybe go on a little bit of a win streak here. But I was surprisingly just looking at a mock draft. It was Bleacher Report. I don't know how highly thought of that is or not, but they had the Giants in the number 2. Who would have ever thought Giants in the number 2 pick? Poor Jets. And they had Baker Mayfield there after Josh Rosen, with Sam Darnold down by 9 to go to Arizona, which is actually a perfect Bruce Arians quarterback. But that surprised me because I've watched Darnold this year, and I think he's been trying to raise up a team that was maybe not as talented as he has led them to be, and maybe made some Eli Manning type mistakes, throwing the ball away here and there. But I don't know. Maybe you kind of fall in love with these bowl games for a guy like that. I feel like Darnold has to be the guy.
I haven't really watched him play too much, so it's tough for me to say. But everything I've heard is that he is the type of quarterback that would work well in New York. And with the New York quarterback, it's also personality as much as it is performance on the field. So I know people look at the draft when Eli was drafted, and obviously you had Roethlisberger and you had Rivers, both of whom have performed very, very well throughout their careers. But the question is, how well would each of those personalities have done in New York? And I think when Ernie Accorsi zeroed in on Eli Manning, it was as much about his mentality and his just his overall makeup fitting with the New York market. And who knows if Ben Roethlisberger would have done that? We don't know. Same thing with Philip Rivers. We don't know. But that calculation definitely seemed to work out with respect to Eli Manning. So I don't know. So it's interesting to see. It's as much performance on the field, obviously, but also I think how you can project that individual will do in New York City.
Well, Baker Mayfield has maxed out his abilities, what you can do in college football, into, what was he, at Texas Tech his first year, and he lost out, I think, the starting or walked on at Oklahoma and becomes the quarterback. He'll probably win the Heisman this year, but he's 6'1". I almost have the feel that he's going to have a Case Keenum type career, where you're sort of underappreciated, maybe undervalued sometimes. But when you're put in a position where you're expected to succeed, you maybe shirk from that. But then the minute you're put in a place where you can really thrive as the underdog, you do well. I mean, look at Case Keenum. He might get himself a nice contract next year. Can you imagine? He's the one who Minnesota ends up keeping out of those 3 quarterbacks for what's been given up. It's very fitting for football. But I almost think that way. Mayfield's 6'1". I don't know. I just want to, for whatever reason, I want to see Darnold. I think you kind of weirdly fall in love with these guys. What are you excited about as the end of this NFL season comes into play? It's hard when the team you watch is just this out of the loop.
It is hard, and also how interesting that you have a 2-10 team in the Giants who have dominated the headlines as much as they have. Now, I know that we're in New York, so we see it, but I mean, even nationally, I think the Giants have been more of a story than a 2-10 team should be.
You're as much a story as when you're the opposite record.
Yeah. Whereas if this were the Houston Texans, I don't think they would be generating this much interest. So it says something about the Giants and what the New York media market does. I don't really know. It's a crazy season. It is pretty crazy when you look at who the divisional leaders are, especially in the NFC, and how that could play out.
It doesn't make sense how many teams have as many wins as they do. Like, Pittsburgh is shocking to be 10-2 to me. Like,
Minnesota.
I feel like they've never gotten there. Yeah, Minnesota is also
10-2.
Philadelphia 10-2. Even the New
Saints.
England, the way they started the season, being 10-2, they might win out your bet still.
They might. And the Saints obviously have exceeded expectations. So I think it'll be interesting to see
new blood here.
I'm interested to see new blood. I'm interested to see how the playoffs go. If you were to ask me today, I don't feel as if any of the divisional leaders have. I think each of them can go on the road and win in any of the other buildings, and vice versa. So sometimes the home field play, really is an advantage. But I don't feel that way. I feel like Minnesota can go into Philadelphia and beat the Eagles, but I also feel like the Eagles can go into Minnesota and beat the Vikings. I feel like the Saints can go into LA. I feel like LA can go into New Orleans. So that maybe will be interesting. I just don't feel like there's the same advantages that home field brings each year. Less so with the AFC. I feel like Pittsburgh does have a home field advantage, and New England does have a home field advantage, but not so much.
This feels more like
NFC.
baseball almost this year.
It does, yeah. It definitely does. And you have a good mix. It's, each team is a little bit different. You have with New Orleans, you have the veteran quarterback, veteran coach who've been there and have managed to recapture some of the magic. In LA, you have the young quarterback, the young coach, really surprising everyone.
Who haven't really, they haven't dropped off. Like, they haven't dropped off yet.
No, they're actually,
lost a step.
They seem like they're actually rounding out how they play more and more on both sides of the ball. And then in Philadelphia, you have sort of the underappreciated coach with a roster that I think is exceeding expectations. And then Minnesota, you have them definitely defying the odds in terms of their quarterback play, and losing. They lost Adrian Peterson last year. He didn't come back. I mean, people wondered how dynamic the offense would be.
And losing Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, at the beginning of the year, they seemed to have a terrific rookie running back. So they're almost having the season this season that they looked to be having last season in the first half. So I let's come back to what I say. I think any of those teams can go into the other team's stadium or dome and win.
Well, the Falcons are on the outside looking in right now, too.
And playing better.
They are, yeah, but they did lose that weird game to Minnesota. But Carolina is 6. New Orleans is there, but like New Orleans, Carolina, Atlanta, 9-8-7 with wins. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Tampa Bay is falling
Green
off.
Bay, he comes back. Aaron Rodgers comes back, I think, this week, and they got the win to at least stabilize to 6-6. Where if he goes on a run and wins the final games,
weren't they 6-6 last year too? Before he went on his run, they were close.
It's very possible. Yeah, I remember they lost like a brutal game. Was it in Chicago, or they won the game where they went Hail Mary? But
they were because people were talking in November, late November, about Mike McCarthy possibly moving on, and then Green Bay goes on the run. So not unlike where they were last year. Yeah,
and the shock of like Tampa Bay being way down, Arizona being way down, Washington being out of it.
And let's not forget about Seattle. They're still there.
No, they beat. They're
beat
rounding into shape, and they play big time football in December. And they have they really. A lot of teams almost play the college game where they come out to win right away and try to win as many games as if you need to not have many losses to make the playoffs. They sort of play very calm and easy, starting the season, figuring out their way. For around 500, it's okay. We'll make a run, and then they just always make a run. And they roll into the postseason in the best shape you can be.
There is a feeling, though, that this is like it for this incarnation of the Seahawks, that this is probably their last run, given where some of their players might end up and how they might reshuffle that roster.
With Richard Sherman out.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's going to be a lot of fun. And I think watching the whole Kansas City, Chargers, Oakland, all being 6-6, I weirdly still feel Kansas City is going to come out of that, though. Like, they'll have the scare of a lifetime. Because I don't trust the Chargers when you need them to win. And then Oakland is really a mess.
Yeah, Oakland's spotty. Not what I expected from them this season, and probably not what they expected from themselves. But they still have a very talented roster. So,
and how are the Ravens? I don't understand how today they'd be in the playoffs. They have 5 losses. And they have 7-5.
They
could go either way with that. Yeah, but it's
the same thing with Cincinnati, too.
It's crazy to me, though, that for every the times you've watched them this year, where they've been shut out, I think 3 times this year, and they're 7-5, just continuing on. Yeah, it's amazing. How about basketball? Shocking with the Celtics have shocked me.
Yeah,
21-4. I mean,
with that roster, having undergone. I think that's something that's overlooked, is just how many new players that they have and how many players they lost in the offseason. When you lose Avery Bradley, who is your defensive anchor, but still are playing the best defense in the league without a drop-off, that's impressive. Look, they have an excellent coach. You can't say enough about that coach.
No, he's like Belichickian.
Yeah, he is. And losing one of their big acquisitions in the offseason within the first few minutes of the first game and bouncing back. Players obviously bought into the system. He goes deep into his roster. He didn't last night. I think he only played 8 players last night. But, he usually plays 10 players, maybe 11 nightly. And it's working. And Kyrie, his decision is smart. Yeah.
He knew it. But then you look 12 games ago, and you're like, wow, what a difference. And here they are, number 2, Cleveland.
Well, yeah,
12-game win
true.
streak, 17-7.
But credit to Danny Ainge for pulling the trigger when he did and selling, you could say, sold at the right time on those assets, because you look at that Nets pick, the Nets already have 9 wins. They easily could have 11 wins. And
they're going to be competitive.
They are competitive. So that draft pick is not going to be quite the asset
They'll get
they
Russell
thought it was.
back at some point.
Yeah. But yeah, Cleveland, you're right. Cleveland put it together just when all the stories were the ink was barely dry in those stories about Cleveland's downfall. The East is fun this year.
I wonder if the genius of the Kyrie move, was he playing three-dimensional chess? Can you play three-dimensional chess in a flat earth? But him leaving puts the onus on LeBron. Well, him leaving first and going to a team, he had to have thought that they could be this level of good. Maybe not without Hayward, but they're going to be this good. Put LeBron in the seat where he has to be chasing Boston, so he's not embarrassed by the move. And does he run himself ragged at this stage in his career, going on 33, just to keep up with this young Buck team, not Bucks, but this young Celtic team? And is this maybe the only way you can beat LeBron, is to force him to have to run himself out in the season like this?
Possibly, but I don't think he cares about having the number 1 seed. He didn't last year.
But he doesn't want to be embarrassed, though. He was being embarrassed.
He was, and I think that's gone. As you point out, that's over.
But he had to work really hard.
He did have to work really hard, but I think now maybe they can coast, and who knows? Maybe they get Isaiah Thomas back. He's rumored to be coming back.
He's going to be a big deal when he comes back, I think.
He is. And I think they just need to get to within the top 3 seeds in the East. And,
yeah. No, they just couldn't be like a less than 50-win team.
No.
That was the thing, and they were looking like they were headed that way, with Kyrie looking. The crazy thing when you look at them now, they're almost on a Golden State-like pace. You feel like it's just a run, and it's not going to get there, and they're not going to get to 70 wins, but they might get to 60 wins.
They could. But I could also see them being like one of those Atlanta Hawks teams that have a great regular season, and then in the playoffs,
I would agree, except they never had Kyrie.
They did not. And
they never had players rising like this. Like
Jaylen Brown.
Tatum is really, really good. They did have Al Horford, of course.
Yeah.
But they were sort of this mishmash of players culminating together who had always been like B+ players, becoming like an A+ team in the regular season. This is like, you have a couple of players who are cream of the crop players, or expected to be. Like, I keep wondering, what's Jason Tatum going to look like in 5 years? He's like a stick, but he's going to grow out. He's going to have a big body. Not overly big, but he's going to put some heft on there and some muscle. That's going to be weird. And I kind of like the way he plays like this. It's like when you had Skinny Carmelo coming out.
Mm-hmm.
They're really good.
And let's not forget, he still has an asset he can move with that pick. So they could put something together. You just don't know. So
do they even want? They could be a 60-win team with Hayward still coming back.
Anthony Davis.
Well, the couple of surprises. I keep waiting for the bottom to fall out. It still might. Detroit being 14-9, and Philadelphia being 13-10, and they had a tough loss last night.
They did,
with Phoenix coming in,
which was weird. A weird loss.
Devin Booker is so good. You almost want him to go somewhere else so we can watch him on a good team.
Mm-hmm.
Like, can you imagine him on a good team?
Well, yeah. Depends upon
there's very few prolific scorers in the NBA anymore.
He's a high volume scorer, so if he doesn't get as many touches on a different team, he may not bring as much value. But yeah, he's a good player.
But Philadelphia has been so fun to watch.
They're a fun team.
And like, Ben Simmons is like a player we've never seen before. I've been watching them a lot. First of all, he commands the floor the way we thought Lonzo Ball would, and we give Lonzo Ball so much negative energy because he can't shoot. Ben Simmons doesn't even try to shoot, and he is the slickest. He looks like he's playing high school basketball when he goes to the hoop. He gets to the hoop, and it's like he doesn't get hurt from people, and he just like does beautiful like Dr. J finger rolls coming to the hoop. He's so crafty that I don't know if he has to get a 3.
He might not. And if he's trying him with the right players, which is why they went after Fultz, because they thought Fultz would.
Boy, Tatum would look good with him, though. Oh,
he would. But yeah, I mean, we still have to see what happens with Fultz. It's a weird story, but hopefully we get to see him play at his peak at some point, because he would help that roster. And they still have to do something with Okafor, figure out where he lands. I feel like he's going to be on the Nets before the season's over, though.
Yeah, he's got to go somewhere, because they're actually diminishing his value in a trade too at this point. Like, just play him to. It's almost like mean what they're doing to him. But the other, so Houston being way out in front makes a lot of sense. I still don't trust that they're going to be standing at the end, because I think Golden State isn't even better than and has some level of defense when they need it. But Oklahoma City, it's one of those where you look at the story coming in and you go, I can't wait to watch them. And the preseason was somewhat okay watching them, but they weren't playing full minutes, so you got the little taste and thought the taste would get better when you got the full meal. And now you have the full meal, and it's kind of unwatchable. And it's like when the Nets put that super team together, and you saw them play, and you go, oh my gosh, this isn't that compelling. And I think the fix they need, none of the guys are 3-point shooters. That's a major problem. At least because the closest analogy for me was the 10 years ago when the Celtics came together, the PGA Tour. But at least the A was a prolific 3-point shooter. None of these guys are very good 3-point shooters, and that's a major problem for spacing when you have these guys who are able to suck in spacing. Like, they need a Kyle Korver from 5 years ago. They need someone who's going to hit open threes. Otherwise, this will be a struggle the whole time. Every night, one of these guys is putting up 36 points, 38 points, and they're just winning. This doesn't get fixed unless they find a way to find a 3-point shooter.
Yeah, that's a great point. I read the article last week. Did Indiana actually win that trade with Paul George?
The Knicks.
Yeah. Yeah, with Cantor. Cantor fits in well there. And
McDermott, 3-point shooter.
And you're looking at what Oladipo is doing and Sabonis are doing. They're playing pretty well in Indiana. So, yeah, I mean, it's on Billy Donovan to make this work, I think.
I don't know how you make it work, though. And it was kind of the same thing with the Nets. They didn't really have a drop-dead 3-point shooter. They had guys who could get hot, but they didn't have a guy who you throw it to and he's going to hit. They had Teletovic, but Teletovic was not like their main player. And if you remember, in the series against the Cavs, the Heat at the time, it was when Teletovic started getting hot that it felt like they had something going here. Because you need that 3-point shooter. Maybe they could get someone like Teletovic, but it's going to be really difficult every time because they're playing D.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when they get to prime time. First of all, it's I go, you go. And it's hard to have a cohesive offense when you have guys who are all the man. And when none of them, like George and Carmelo, sort of double up on top of each other a little bit, except Carmelo's older and a little less useful at this point. And Russ, I think when he doesn't see things work, he doesn't have trust in his teammates. And then he goes even more in himself. And maybe he needed to be the player he was last year for you to even just top out at a 44-win team. I think it's very. This might break apart, and Carmelo might be the last one. Although Russ did sign the longer deal, but they got to get. It's so stark how much they need the shooting. They have everything else. They have the down low players when you don't really need them. And maybe they could still give it a run in a playoff series because they have the pieces to go up against a Golden State, but I also think they could just be kind of shot out of the building. And I have to wonder, like, if Greg Popovich were coaching this team, or if Brad Stevens were coaching this team, the kind of coaches who take the mix they have and coach that up to the best of its ability rather than a system and make the players work the system. I wonder what that would even look like with this team.
I don't know.
It's hard. It's hard. Like, I don't know what the right mix is. It might have not been as great an off-season deal as it. When you win the off-season, often you don't win the regular season. A lot of times when that happens, look at the Giants. Year 1, they won it. Year 2, Mercenaries. It doesn't look so good. Your Memphis fell apart.
Oh, not surprising.
Dallas is shockingly bad. New Orleans is hanging in there, but they're not. They might be a 500 team at the end of it all. The Spurs still being 16-8 just amazes me.
Portland's
good. Denver, although right when I swear I never really watched Denver because I said that they have like the Sports Center problem. A team gets in front of your view when they do something that would put them on the front of Sports Center, like the first segment. Denver never does that. Even Portland will do that because they'll go on like a 12-game win streak. Denver never does that, so I never really think to watch them. But then the other night I was like, you know what, I'm going to watch Denver tonight. And it was against Chicago too. And I'm watching it because I wanted to see how Jokic plays. Everyone's talking to him. He's so good. He is so good. He's like a bigger Marc Gasol. Like the way he commands the team from the post and his passing and his one-armed kind of like a big bear.
It's like Bill Walton.
It's beautiful. And in that game, he turned his ankle and he was out of the game. So when he comes back, I don't know if he's back yet. I'll watch them. But that was fun. And Golden State, it's funny. They're 8-2 in their last 10. They've won 4 in a row. They're 19-6. But they're falling victim to their own success because you just noticed the losses, and yet they're within a couple of percentage points of being the number 1 seed. Like there's almost not a lot to watch for them in the regular season anymore.
That's true. I mean, last year the story was about how they were going to incorporate Durant.
I always do that too.
Yeah, I do too. Incorporate Durant. They essentially have no story this year. They have no compelling narrative internally.
Absolutely. Last thing I wanted to say, because we're getting into our season, what are we looking forward to? We got to get started with our movies.
Oh, that's right.
For the Oscars.
Oh.
And they're going to start now. So I'm luckily we saw Dunkirk.
We did.
That was a summer movie that very rarely does the summer movie rise up to Oscar season. And I was not excited to see that movie, and that was a great movie.
It was. I saw a movie just recently that came out this summer that you're going to hear me talk about it. I think needs to be in the conversation. If not for Best Picture, definitely for Best Actor, and even Best Supporting Actor, is Wind River. Loved it. I mean, Jeremy Renner's fantastic in Wind River. Terrific. I mean, it has been on a couple of... I've seen it appear on, if not on lists of 10 best, maybe honorable mention. I think it was on one, like Best Independent Film. It was originally a Weinstein picture, but I think they've since bought the rights so that they can market during the Oscar season on their own. Really, really good.
What about when a Weinstein movie, by the way, is an Oscar contender? Like a movie about Weinstein and the sexual harassment. Won't that be the ultimate culmination, the apotheosis of everything Harvey Weinstein has been?
That will be. Call Me by Your Name.
The Post.
The Post.
I want to see The Post so bad. And by the way, All the President's Men just came on HBO this month.
Okay. Phantom Thread.
Lady Bird,
still haven't seen.
Call Me by Your Name.
Yes.
Isn't that the one with
The Shape of Water?
All these weird names, you forget. Isn't it funny when you look at the list now and you're like, what the hell is this? But then by Oscar season, we're going to know them inside and out to the point where it's like, oh, what do you mean you don't know Call Me by Your Name?
Yeah. Mudbound. Downsizing.
3 Billboards Outside Ebbing.
Yeah. So we're getting a sense the race is starting to take shape.
Get Out is in there too, which was a good one.
Yeah, and it should be.
Darkest Hour.
Oh, yeah. People are saying that Gary Oldman's going to walk away with Best Actor this year.
Yeah.
And, The Florida Project.
That's in
People
there.
are saying Willem Dafoe is definitely going to be Best Supporting Actor.
So there was, I feel bad too, because John Lithgow played an amazing Winston Churchill in The Crown, the Netflix miniseries. He was very good in that. It's like all these poor guys who have to play Churchill and they don't even get the credit. It's going to be Oldman. They should all rise up on the shoulders of Oldman.
You definitely get a sense of, the Critics Award is starting to come out now, and it's giving you, it's definitely giving me a direction as to what I need to start watching for the podcast.
Do you think The Post is going to be as good as Spotlight?
It might be better. I mean, people are saying it's his best movie since Munich, and Munich is a fantastic movie.
I'm just interested to see what the angle is of The Post. Have you read it all about that? Like, what is... I mean, obviously, it's The Post during Katharine Graham's time, And who is Hanks playing Bradley?
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess it's just about the time.
Yeah, the risk that she took, and I think sort of the internal pressure that she faced running, the forces that she had to keep bay internally, but then also going out on such a limb externally. And I think the obviously the in the national service, sort of the personal risk that she took, and how that redounded to the nation's interest.
Funny thing, I never knew this until I read the book last year, the Warren Buffett, The Snowball, how close he was with Katharine Graham. Like, because he became a board member, I believe, of the Washington Post, and like literally they were together all the time, but like strictly platonic type of thing. Yeah,
she's a fascinating person, fascinating figure.
Yeah, I'm very excited, but man, I look at these movies. Like since we've started doing the podcast, I like rarely see movies outside of Oscar season. Like such a snob. Phantom Thread, what's that?
Phantom Thread is the Paul Thomas Anderson, Daniel Day-Lewis movie.
Oh.
Which Daniel Day-Lewis said is going to be his final movie.
Right. It's like a rap album, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm excited, and I really am glad that the one I saw was worth it.
Yeah,
like in terms of my Oscar watching.
That you
but that was a great movie too, and I literally only saw it because it was the one day it rained when I was in Wildwood. There was nothing else to do. Everybody conspired upon this small theater, away from the beach, off the inland over the internal waterway. And I remember just sitting in this, and everybody was waiting online, and I happened to get the tickets online, on the internet, and then we got in, and it was like, oh my God, we're not going to get it. And it was like, no, we're going to get it. We're good. And we had to sit like right under the, you get that last seat right under the screen, and you're just like looking up with a crank in your neck.
Which is not a movie you want. This is not the movie you want that seat for.
No, no, it wasn't. It was
I was very up close too when I saw it, and I was sick afterward.
Very overwhelming. Yeah. No, I'm excited. Got to start getting to work again. Ugh.
I know. Well.
Oh wait. Best film comedy. Oh, that's Golden Globes. Okay. So I was like, oh, The Big Sick. And then there's all these other movies you should see that aren't in Oscars, and it's tough because before Oscars are completely nominated, you go out on a limb sometimes, and you're like, well, I'll go see this to get a head start, with the assumption it'll be in it, and then it's like this feeling of like regret when you get in there and it didn't get nominated. Was that like The Lobster last year or something? I forget which one.
Well, I remember for you 2 years ago it was I know I'm friends with the person who wrote the book, and I can't even think of the name of it.
Was it in Nocturnal Animals or something?
No, it was
Was that one nominated though? I forget.
It was nominated for best screenplay, but this was we thought it was
Beasts of No Nation.
Beasts of No Nation. Yeah.
Oh God, I had to see just like child
Uzo's movie.
Pedophilia. Oh.
Yeah.
And it was Netflix. So you're like, I'm all in for it.
Yeah, and it didn't get nominated. So, yeah, I mean, Suburbicon. A lot of people thought that was going to be nominated, but it doesn't appear to be surfacing on any of the lists. So that might have been a lost movie if someone had seen that. But yeah, this is the fun time of year.
Exciting. All right.
All right.
That was a good around the horn.
Thanks very much, Matt.